Our presentation is on the fiscal crisis in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania in the 2000s. Harrisburg, once a thriving Pennsylvania capital, faced one of the worst U.S. city financial crises due to a mismanaged $77 million waste to energy project that ballooned to $288 million. The city couldn't generate enough revenue to cover its guaranteed debt, leading to bankruptcy, lawsuits, and political deadlock by 2010. The state intervened through Act 47, and after a rejected 2011 bankruptcy filing, Harrisburg implemented the Harrisburg Strong Plan, selling the incinerator, leasing parking assets, and reorganizing debt, ultimately stabilizing finances and highlighting the dangers of excessive borrowing and poor project oversight. The fiscal crisis in Harrisburg had multiple layers of decision makers involved. At the city level, the mayor and city council faced the tough choice of either accepting the state's recovery plan or going for bankruptcy, decisions that would impact the city's financial autonomy. On the state side, the governor and legislator wielded significant power under Act 47, which governed Harrisburg's ability to file for bankruptcy and later appointed a receiver to oversee the city's finances, taxes, and asset sales. The bankruptcy court also had a hand in this by rejecting Harrisburg's Chapter 9 filing. In the end, the main conflict revolved around whether financial control would stay with local leaders or be transferred to the state through receivership. The main question whether Harrisburg should go for Chapter 9 bankruptcy to sort out its debt or stick to the state's Act 47 recovery plan. This choice involved weighing legal, financial, and political factors. If bankruptcy wasn't an option, the city had to figure out how to get its finances back on track by renegotiating debts, selling or leasing assets like the incinerator and parking garages, or tweaking taxes and services. The state also needed to decide how much oversight to have over local finances. In the end, the crucial question was whether Harrisburg could legally reorganize through bankruptcy or if it had to go with a state-managed recovery plan. The city council and the mayor were focused on getting Harrisburg's finances back on track while ensuring public services and local governance were preserved. Some members even considered bankruptcy as a way to gain an advantage over creditors. On the other hand, the state government aimed to maintain Pennsylvania's municipal finance system, safeguard state taxpayers, and enforce regulations such as Act 47. Creditors, however, were looking for the highest possible repayment and were against bankruptcy, fearing it would create a dangerous precedent. Meanwhile, citizens and employees were all about keeping services intact and ensuring fair taxes. The receiver appointed by the state was dedicated to stabilizing the finances and rolling out a sustainable recovery plan. Harrisburg's issues arose from a massive debt linked to its waste-to-energy incinerator project, for which the city had backed bonds. Unfortunately, the facility didn't bring in nearly as much revenue as expected, forcing the city to dip into its general fund to make payments, which only made its financial situation worse. On top of the incinerator debt, the city was also dealing with general obligation debt and ongoing deficits. This meant that the yearly income wasn't enough to cover regular expenses and debt payments, pushing the city to depend on one-time funds, reserve withdrawals, and emergency access actions instead of finding long-term solutions. As time went on, Harrisburg's credit rating plummeted, borrowing costs skyrocketed, and lawsuits from creditors piled up. The main challenge became how to cut down or restructure these obligations without severely impacting essential services or breaking any legal agreements. The number of players played a role in Harrisburg's comeback. The Act 47 coordinator, along with the State Financial Oversight Office, crafted and oversaw the recovery strategy, while legal and financial advisors provided guidance on managing debt, although some ended up being blamed for the incinerator's failure. Courts made decisions on bankruptcy, cases and disputes among creditors, while bond insurers and financial institutions worked to protect their stakes. The state legislature enacted laws such as Act 26 to restrict bankruptcy choices and citizens, unions, watchdog groups, Dauphin County, and the state treasurer all pushed for accountability to protect both financial and reputational interests. Harrisburg faced tough choices due to strict legal, financial, and political constraints. State and federal regulations, specifically Acts 47 and 26, prevented bankruptcy without proper authorization. And local laws, along with bond agreements, limited financial options. The city dealt with fiscal challenges like a declining tax base, stagnant income, high borrowing costs, and a weak economy. On the political side, there was public discontent over tax increases, service reductions, and asset sales. Although opportunities were scarce, they included state-led financial management, monetizing assets, and negotiating with creditors. Every decision was made with the goal of restoring financial health while trying to protect residents and the city's image in the long run.
The main issue was how to manage the massive debt from the incinerator project, which consumed the city's entire budget capacity. Harrisburg faced more expenses than income, creating an annual deficit and forcing the city to borrow more to cover operational costs. The city council and mayor disagreed on whether to file for bankruptcy, leading to delays in adopting a recovery plan. The state's oversight board eventually stepped in under the Act 47 of Pennsylvania's fiscal distress program. You go to the next slide. Harrisburg's leaders had no easy choices. Each action carried trade-offs between financial stability and public trust. The bankruptcy option was rejected by the state, forcing the city into Act 47 recovery plan instead. The sale of the incinerator and parking assets helped repay much of the debt, but it meant losing control over long-term revenue. These decisions highlight how politics and financial realities both shape the outcome of the crisis.
Hello, my name is Mike Raphael, and I will be speaking on the problem and core issues and also the recommendations for the fiscal crisis for Harrisburg. Problem and core issues. The cost overruns and excessive debt from incinerator project. A central driver of Harrisburg's crisis was the massive overrun in the incinerator retrofit project. What began as a modest capital upgrades spiraled into additional obligations exceeding 300 million in various debt instruments, placing undue burden on the city's balance sheet. The concentration of debt around a single project amplified downside risk. When the incinerator underperformed, there was no other engine to backfill revenues. Governance and procurement failures. The case demonstrates a breakdown in procurement, oversight and risk allocation. Elected officials and oversight bodies failed to monitor consultants, technical contractors, and financial intermediaries. These agency theory helps explain how agents, consultants, contractors might take more aggressive risk, gambles when oversight is lax, especially when their compensation is tied to project volume or contract size. Declining tax base and weak fiscal capacity. Harrisburg's tax base was eroding. population decline, stagnating property values, and limited ability to raise taxes constrained the city's capacity to absorb higher debt service. Local governments under this condition lose fiscal flexibility. The mismatch between rising obligations and slow revenue growth is a classic red flag in debt sustainability models. Reliance on one-time fix and reserve draws. In attempts to patch shortfalls, Harrisburg engaged in asset sales and reserve draws. While these provided short-term breathing room, they also sacrifice recurring revenue streams and diminish buffers for future downturns. A strategy, which is a strategy often criticized in public asset management literature. State legal barriers delayed restructuring. State law, court interpretations, and Pennsylvania's limited municipal bankruptcy access, which was under state statutes, constrained Harrisburg's options. The city could not freely file Chapter 9 or unilaterally force deep creditor concessions, which delayed restructuring and magnified of the crisis. Evaluation of actions taken. State receivership imposed discipline but reduced local control. Harrisburg was placed under state receivership via Pennsylvania's distressed municipality framework. This intervention introduced fiscal discipline and a path for restructuring, but did so at the cost of local authority. Such receiverships often displaced elected officials and centralized decision authority in a receiver. While necessary under crisis conditions, receivership is not a panacea, particularly if it fails to rebuild local accountability. Asset sales provided short-term liquidity, sacrificed future revenues. The sale or lease of parking assets, land parcels, and incinerator-related property generated immediate cash, but at the expense of future revenue streams. These were essentially one-time fixes, masquerading as structural solution. This trade-off illustrates the danger of converting reliable recurring income into short-term liquidity relief. Debt negotiation limited by legal constraints. Harrisburg's leadership attempted to negotiate with creditors and avoid full municipality bankruptcy. However, legal uncertainties, creditor resistance, and state constraints limited the depth of debt relief achievable. These taxes postponed the pain, but sometimes aggravated the creditor distress. Theories and models applied. Principal agent theories explain governance and oversight failures. This lens clarifies how misaligned incentives and weak monitoring contributed to project escalation. Agents, consultants, contractors, and advisors might take risk, position, or understate contingencies if their compensation is linked to project size or execution. Effective governance will require incentives and oversight designed to internalize risk for agents. Debt sustainability models identify mismatch between debt and revenue. Debt sustainability formulas compare debt stock, debt service, and recurring revenue growth. And Harrisburg debt service obligation escalated faster than revenue capacity, indicating unsustainable leverage. These models emphasize three levels: reduce debt, raise revenues, or cut recurring expenses. Asset liability management, or ALM, and emphasize matching liabilities with reliable cash flows. ALM demands matching the risk profile and maturity of liabilities with reliable cash inflows. Harrisburg violated this principle by backing long-term debt with certain incinerator revenues without adequate stress testing or contingency reserves. Public choice theories. This shows political incentive to defer hard choices. Elected officials face short electoral horizons, pushing them toward projects that created visible gains, such as stadiums, museums, and postponed painful trade-offs, such as tax hikes, deep cuts. Long-term risk is often undervalued in political decision-making. Capital budgeting frameworks. This advocate life cycle costing and independent reviews. A rigorous capital budgeting system demands full cycle, cost estimate, risk buffers, and independent vetting. Harrisburg's failure to subject the incinerator plan to such scrutiny allowed it to escalate unchecked. My recommendations and next steps. First, comprehensive, transparent debt restructuring. Harrisburg should negotiate with all creditor classes, extending maturities, reducing interest where possible, and seeking principal forgiveness where legal, feasible, use model to align debt service with revenue capacity. Strengthen capital governance and procurement reforms. It requires independent reviews, business case vetting, life cycle costing, contingency margins, and conflict of interest mitigation and future capital projects. Implement multi-year fiscal planning and reserve policy. Harrisburg could adopt rolling 3 to 5 years projections, formal reserve targets, for example, 8 to 12% of operating revenues, and periodic stress testing of debt portfolios. Number 4, avoid sacrificing recurring revenues for short-term fixes. Only consider asset sales, leases with their proceeds are applied to permanent structural improvements, not as an ongoing bandages. Fifth, build stakeholder engagement and fair burden sharing. Foster citizen and creditor buy-in for measures. For example, phase tax increase, service restructuring, pension contributions through transparent communication and participatory processes. We build local capacity and gradual return to fiscal autonomy. As financial stability improves, progressively return control to elected officials while maintaining oversight mechanism to prevent elapse. In conclusion, Harrisburg fiscal crisis underscores how governance failures, poor risk alignment, and structural revenues constraint can transform a single capital project into a long-term municipal meltdown. Applying principal agent theory, ALM debt sustainability frameworks, and public choice insights reveals both the diagnosis and the prescriptions. Recovery demands not just debt relief, but institutional reform. Stronger governance, disciplined capital and fiscal planning, and renewed accountability. If implemented carefully, this reform can rebuild resilience and prevent recurrence of such crises. Thank you.